Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to have you join me for another one of my interviews for my UCLA courses. We get the opportunity to meet with experts in this field and learn from them. And I love having this opportunity to interview people about topics that we care about, the students we work with, and the families we work with. So today I have the privilege and honor of interviewing Patrick Beckwith. He is the Director of Military and Veteran Services at the University of Montana. I had the great privilege of visiting the University of Montana this past summer with a group of counselors. If you've never done the Montana tour, I highly recommend it, and heard Patrick speak there and really appreciated everything he had. So welcome, Patrick. I'm glad you're here today.
Thank you, Cyndy. I appreciate it.
So what brought you to the University of Montana? Tell us a little bit about your background and your service, your experience.
Yeah, so my journey to Montana, I guess in one way was deliberate. I wanted to end up in Montana after my active duty time. I served about 10 years on active duty and had several deployments, both to Afghanistan and Iraq. And I knew after kind of engaging abroad that I was really focused on education. The experiences I had showed me how pivotal education is just in societies at large. And then even in myself, as I was exposed to more things, I kind of had this lust for more knowledge and to kind of broaden some of my fields. So coming back home and getting off active duty, I knew I wanted to go pursue a master's degree, and I knew I wanted to do that in Montana. And then I wanted to find ways to get into education. I had the opportunity to be an ROTC instructor at the University of Montana as kind of a way to bridge the gap between my service and getting into more of a civilian career. And that helped really show me the opportunities that education can unwrap if you're willing to take advantage of them. And, the current position I'm in now was just a really good transition. As I went through the discovery process and learned about my own education benefits, I really saw one of the best things running for your service is gaining education benefits through the military. But I also knew that it's kind of a hidden secret, or it's not well talked about or discussed if you are a military member looking to transition. So becoming a director in this capacity really afforded me the opportunity to help a lot more people take advantage of that and then improve the systems at the institution that I go to. So, I'm still in the Montana National Guard as well, and it gives me some of that personal satisfaction to continue to serve, but it also helps cultivate some of what I've done on campus within the community of service members as well. And that's kind of what led me to this position and some of the aspirations I have.
I think that's very important. And I'm sure it really resonates with the veterans that you work with, because you've been there, you've done it, you've gone through, and you know what they're experiencing and you know what they're going through. So you can probably build rapport with them much easier than maybe somebody like myself who has only seen it from the outside. So what are some of the resources that you mentioned that are available to veterans when they're ready to start thinking about what questions should they start asking before they leave the service and getting ready to transition into civilian life?
Yeah, that's the hardest part is service members. If you think of it, they're on active duty. They're still obligated to their profession, and they're stationed oftentimes away from what they call home, or away from the institution, the education that they might pursue, or away from the career pathways they might pursue. And so it's really difficult sometimes to put in front of them what is available. And the military tries to provide, whether it's briefings or training, to show them how to leverage certain opportunities. But what the military is doing is it's saying, hey, when you transition out, there's kind of two paths. You can go into education, or you can go start to pursue a completely new profession. And outside of that, it's incumbent on the service member to both decide what they want to do and go through a rigorous discovery process of what the steps are. And unless they take a lot of that responsibility on, there's many gaps in the information they're looking for. And so what we find, I can speak for the education realm, is we receive a lot of phone calls from service members that are still on active duty, and they just have a lot of questions. They really don't know what's available to them. They don't know the financial cost or what the pathway looks like. You kind of have to consider it a full-on counseling opportunity to show them what they can do or what they have available. Because even still, there's a lot of, whether they're nonprofit or government organizations that are dedicated to this transition phase, but those are available resources that aren't necessarily in the path of that service member. And so they have to deliberately reach out for that assistance or help. And unfortunately, veterans sometimes are our own worst enemy. We think we're capable of making this transition, and then we don't reach out for help until we're already kind of in the mud trying to figure it out. And then at that point, we're like, shoot, I need to look for some resources. And they are there, but then it's hard as well to filter which resources really line up with what you intend to do. And, in defense of our society, we have a ton of resources that are available. Mm-hmm. But in order to distill which ones you should leverage as a service member, you almost need another resource to help you in that realm. And that's where, like, for myself, as in the education field, whether they come to Montana or not, I'm looking at ways to guide them as to how to best leverage their education benefits.
So don't they have to make certain decisions before they leave the service in terms of how to use those benefits?
Yeah, and that's kind of a critical point as well. Service members that are leaving active duty, there's different types of Veterans Affairs education benefits that exist, and they have to go through a process to determine which one they'll receive. And rather than get into the weeds, I mean, there's quite a bit of detail there. It's just important they know that, hey, you have access to benefits. Go through the process to figure out which one you would like to have applied, either to yourself, or more importantly, do you want to potentially transfer those benefits to your children? And that's a critical conversation that's oftentimes not realized. Service members may not have children, or their children are really young, or they don't know that they can even transfer them, or when that has to be done. Because technically, if you do not transfer your benefits before you get off active duty, you can't. That's locked. That's an opportunity that is gone. And so having that conversation early before they do step away is very important. And I remember speaking when you were up here, high school counselors, one of the realizations that I made is, how do we fix that problem? How do we ensure that service members think about that or consider that? I consider it almost like a grassroots method where high school counselors know which students are in their class that have parents that serve. And those students should be told, hey, you might have education benefits if your parents transfer it. And then that student goes, hey, mom or dad, I could go to college for free if you transferred. Are you thinking about doing that? And that kind of invigorates, I should consider that, because the reality is that service member is probably really focused on just their transition and won't make that realization until it is brought up in a very genuine way internally. Oftentimes there is a guidance counselor that will say at the last minute, do you want to transfer your benefits? And they're like, no, I just want to leave for the day. And they're done with the meeting or whatever the case. And the consideration is not given to the height that it needs to be.
And going back to which benefits you qualify for, doesn't it depend on like when you served and when you joined the military, how long you've been in it, like which bill was applicable during the time when you started? How do you know? Like, I know there's several different levels and bills that apply, but it's all based on when you started, or what is it based on?
Yeah, it absolutely. There's some bills that determine your eligibility based off of your start date. And so, but for the most part, the predominant one out there is called the post 9/11 Chapter 33 GI Bill. And that benefit is also probably considered the best benefit because you become eligible for that based off of the number of active duty days you had. So most people that serve on active duty, full-time service members, will qualify for at least a portion of that GI Bill. And as soon as you qualify for a portion of that GI Bill, you also qualify to transfer that to your spouse or dependents, your children. And then there's a couple other ones, and one I'll mention, it's called Chapter 31, Veteran Readiness and Employment. And that's a benefit that only the service member gets if they have a minimum of 10% disability rating from the VA. And that's another incredible education benefit, very similar to the GI Bill. And then there's one called Chapter 35, and that is if you qualify for 100% disability rating. And that's not for the service member, that is for their dependents again. And so, some, for the most part, if you don't qualify for Chapter 33 and yet you have 100% disability rating, your children could still use that. It's a benefit that they can apply. And so that same conversation I said that high school counselors can have with students that have, family in the service, Chapter 35 could be another avenue that they could look for if they have 100% disability rating through the VA.
So if they've already gone through this transition, they've already left the military and they're now becoming civilians, what are resources or things that we can recommend that they go through? I know a lot of colleges more and more are offering centers, veteran centers in their campuses. Tell us about the goal that you have at the University of Montana. So once they've made that transition, it's not too late to be able to take advantage of some different benefits or opportunities, is it?
Yeah, absolutely not. It's not too late. And, if a lot of people transition out of the military and need some of that time to go through self-discovery and not transition directly into something. And we see that happen all the time with folks that come here to become students, or even in the community, ones that have kind of done some self-discovery and then they want to get into an employment service. And there's two different branches there really. And the Veteran Support Office, the Veteran Service Office, the VSO, those are nationwide. You'll see those embedded in communities. You'll oftentimes see like veteran services networks that are stood up, and they're VA funded organizations that are community embedded. And those are forward-facing offices that veterans can go to really with an employment outreach potential. The other, and they bridge the gap with my office as well. But campuses are, I'll kind of step back. Campuses don't have necessarily VA paid employees. What campuses have to do, though, is if anybody on their campus wants to use a VA education benefit, the campus has to hire and credential a school certifying official, somebody that is most likely a veteran and can understand all the nuances of applying VA benefits. And as a result, that it's not a VA paid office, but it's very closely attuned to what VA requirements are. And like at the University of Montana, the growth that we have in our office is dedicated to this Military and Veteran Center that is hyper focused on the needs and potential of student veterans on campus. And by defining that with a structured office, what that does is similar to the VA's community embedded resources. We essentially are embedding resources on campus that help anybody that's going to use their education benefits maximize the use of that money, but more importantly, maximize their potential through the academic pathways and into follow-on careers.
So that gives opportunity either coming into the community to use it or coming into the educational, institution, that there's a resource and a place for them to go where they can feel comfortable and ask questions and learn things. So what is your mission for the University of Montana in terms of veterans?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bold mission, but we want to be the most military friendly institution in the nation. And the reason Montana is primed to achieve that goal is Montana is the second highest per capita veteran population in the United States, only to Alaska. And obviously there's a theme there. I guess veterans want to kind of get out of the military and hike in the mountains or disappear in the woods for a little bit. But as a result of that, every every veteran kind of comes back out of the woods to kind of rediscover who they are. And, they really engage in the community. And so in addition to the high per capita, there's just a lot of veteran-centered organizations in this community. And, with that number of veterans, it also transfers into the number of student veterans we have. Depending on the data that you look at, we're well over 1,000 military affiliated students on campus, which, puts us over 10% of our student population is military affiliated. And, a number like that just shows you the connections that they have, that we can help, bridge the gap as a culture. And then, what does it mean to be friendly? That's a really important, that's broad. What does friendliness look like? Friendliness genuinely is meeting student veterans where they're at and taking them where they need to be. And, that's the type of culture we're trying to establish in layers. And it's not just the administrative components, the faculty components, it's the student components. You can't just have one entity that is embracing that demographic. And, an important caveat to that is, we're really changing the narrative that we lead with at the University of Montana. Societally, and then within communities, you often find that veterans are looked at as kind of a fragile component as they transfer out of the military. And what we want to really show is there are elements, yes, of veterans that we need to be cognizant of as we help them transition. But the reality is they have many strengths and attributes that we think as a university, but societally, we should be trusting them and putting confidence in them to succeed. And if we lead with that narrative, I think it's going to make them feel more comfortable overall to dive into this new opportunity and adapt to the change and kind of rebuild their identity versus leading with some of these more coddling terminologies that we've currently embraced. And so we're trying to redefine that at the university, and we're seeing the impact of it because genuinely, we think our student veterans can be at the core of leading a lot of the other initiatives on campus.
Well, they've experienced so much more, and they have life experience that they're bringing with them. And most veterans, as they're coming back, they've got families, they're older, they have so many other things that they can contribute as leaders and as innovators in campus, and they've got that life experience that when they're in this class, they can say, I can see how this applies, and here's what happened, or here's how it applies, and how much that enriches not only their experience, but everybody's experience, So I love that you're redefining and changing the narrative, because I know as a counselor, I'm always looking at, well, what are the challenges, and you hear about the PTSD, especially from veterans coming back from deployment and other, countries, and, all the challenges that they have transitioning from military life back to civilian. But redefining the narrative and saying, what strengths are you bringing, I think is key. And I think it's something we all need to remember, not only in this circumstance, but with all our students.
Absolutely.
So are there some ways that you've been able to redefine that narrative? What are some examples of things that you've been able to do, Patrick?
Yeah, one right out the door that we've established is we stood up pretty early on. We reinvigorated the Student Veterans Organization, which is essentially a sponsored club on campus. And, but in standing that up, we realized that the purpose is not to kind of create an echo chamber of just veterans coming together on campus. It was by design, the students were like, okay, how do we use this organization to embed ourselves throughout campus? And what that has developed into is a student ambassador program. And what the whole intent by the ambassador program is, we have a student veteran that is most likely a junior, a senior, or maybe even a grad student that is a part of or affiliated with a college or department. And they volunteer as, hey, I'm the student veteran in this college that any incoming student veteran that my office identifies can connect with for mostly academic related and professional based development on campus. But even outside of that, kind of the cultural welcoming process and using those student ambassadors to really show them, hey, these are the strengths and attributes. These are the ways that you can, improve yourself and grow on campus. And really seeing through the student veteran, someone that's role modeling those attributes that they can consider a peer. And I think that's the most important part, is invigorating some of the stronger personalities currently on campus to role model what it looks like under this new narrative of strengths first, and having that approach, and then within my office, it's, in parallel to the grassroots element with those students, I have to do it with faculty. And you brought up a great point, Cyndy. A lot of counselors, and it's not their fault, and it's our society, lead with the assumptions and some of the preconceived notions that veterans are fragile and maybe bringing a lot of these, whether PTSD or other mental health struggles to the table. And I agree that is important. But I also look at it as that is a personalized, you use those approaches in a personalized perspective. Generally, though, we want to highlight and say, okay, our student veterans are coming to the table with these incredible time management, discipline, organization, team building, all of these other skills. And we need to talk about those to build confidence in them. And guess what? It'll probably overshadow any of those other vulnerabilities that we've discussed. I fully admit, and I say point blank, that student veterans are some of the most vulnerable populations when they come to campus. And honestly, it's not because of those weaknesses. It's because their strengths, they know when they get to campus, if it's not a good fit, they can take some of those strengths elsewhere really quick, adapt, and meet the basic needs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be okay. But we want to show them that their strengths will really excel if they just stay the course here on campus.
Wow. I think that's so powerful. The comparison or the analogy that comes to my mind is we try to do as counselors, do the same thing with our neurodiverse students. Everybody always focuses on what they don't have, but what we try to do is focus on what they do have, on the strengths and opportunities. And the same kind of comparison is magnified tremendously, through the veterans. So how can we as counselors help veterans more? What can we do? What would you recommend for us as counselors? What can we do to help make your job easier?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, because it shows that there is this need to have more touch points with veterans at all different levels and at different places in the community to help them transition and succeed. And what I would tell you is similar to what we just spoke about, is listen to where that veteran is at and gauge their level of confidence, and look for real quick opportunities to instill in them that they have many qualities and strengths that actually translate exceptionally well to whatever endeavor they're pursuing. And look for those short-term gains and victories that you can highlight within that veteran, because unfortunately the military does a really good job at almost doing everything for you and making the transition look like the most intimidating thing you're ever going to undertake. I had many peers that chose to deploy to combat over transition out of the military, because transitioning looked way more scary than a deployment. And a part of that is because there's just so much ambiguity and unknown. They're giving up their identity. And really where we can interdict is like reconfirm or affirm that they're not going to lose their soft skills. Those skills that I highlighted, those soft skills, will translate very well into an academic environment. Just because they've been out of school for a long period of time doesn't mean that they're not going to be able to quickly regain their abilities, because they function great within structure. They are very task oriented. I mean, they're going to complete assignments, or if they can't, they're going to figure out how, or they're going to collaborate with somebody else. So pushing those reminders is one of the things I would say is the easiest. The other element is we have to recognize that a lot of times veterans don't ask for help deliberately. And so how do we, if we just make ourselves available, we won't be reaching the number of veterans that we really want to. And so when I think of counselors, it's putting yourself in a position to directly engage with them, or find out how they're doing, or cultivating the conversation, building some relatability that gets them to open up, so that you can less be a counselor, but kind of be a mentor in guiding them the directions that are attainable given the skills that they have. Veterans are sometimes resistant to that input, or they may not trust outside entities, but as soon as they find some of that relatability, or you instill confidence, very likely to open up.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. So you mentioned these different offices, the Veteran Service Office or the campus. So wherever a counselor is, who should they reach out to find more resources, or how do they find out about different opportunities in their communities?
Yeah, the best one, kind of the nucleus of especially this community here in Missoula, is the Veteran Services Office and the VSO. And because that is kind of VA sponsored, it's going to quickly align you. If your question is any question, they can get you to the next resource pretty quickly. My office tries to replicate that, but the reality is I'm the educational component that the VSO will direct people to if they have questions about pursuing school. And, a lot of, I mentioned the Veteran Services Network, which it's more or less like a list serve. I mean, you get onto this, email listserv here in the community of Missoula, and it's this network of people that every resource on a weekly basis is updated with opportunities that you have through any topic you can imagine. And, getting tied into that is vitally important for a veteran. And a lot of times they don't, because there is that desire during transition to almost rebuke where you're coming from, like get away from it and make that transition just real abrupt.
Yeah, so, just have a clean cut.
Yep. And that hurts, because down the road they're like, oh man, what's out there that I can quickly tie into? Like I need to ask some questions. And so the quicker we can get that information, at least it's there. And again, that just puts services available. So then the next step is, if a veteran is floundering, like how do we get somebody directly in front of them to start assisting?
Okay. Oh, that sounds great. Patrick, thank you so much. This has just been so educational, inspirational, and just very affirming in terms of what we can do and highlighting. And I love changing the narrative. I think that's the biggest theme. So thank you very, very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Cyndy.